So the first step always, represented in this case by the moon, is purification, the lowest rung of the ladder. All things must become clean. Clean inwardly, clean morally, clean and simple and honest in their dealings with each other. Purity in this case means overcoming ulterior motives, overcoming all of the negative criticisms and evil thoughts which offend the law as well as our neighbor, and also to realize that this is the first step and that no one can take the second step until he passes the first one. So the search inwardly for the mystery of the seven-rung ladder has to begin with the individual bringing his material, physical life into order. Some other people would like to jump right past that and go on to something better. But unless it is conquered, there is no receptivity to something better. The individual who has not corrected his faults will not be happy by lifting them to another level. He will keep right on having his faults. So the first step of the first rung of the ladder was purification. It was the process of bringing the life into harmony with natural law. It was to make the world a natural garden, as it was intended to be, in which all things lived together in peace, and everything was mutually supporting all other things. This land of personal purification is a matter of quite a little serious thought for most people. One of the best ways is to sit down, figure out what your most obvious failings are, and then dividing them up, make a little slip of paper and say, I have a rather quick temper. I'm not very patient. So for the next 30 days, I will work with patience. I will try to discover why I am impatient, and I will also discover why I am punished for impatience. If I am sufficiently impatient, I will have nervous ailments. If it gets too bad, I may have to go to a counselor. If it still gets even worse, it'll break my home. All these things will have to be taken into consideration. But there is no cure except to change, to grow up into a realization of the value. To fight yourself into a control is no good, unless inwardly your consciousness supports that control. It is of no value to you or anything that you are doing. There is no way of getting away except by correcting the fault. Correcting it because we want to grow, not because the fault is a delightful thing we would like to enjoy whenever the occasion arises. When someone offends us, we want to be offended, and we want to show it. So then there are two offenses, one by the other person and one by ourselves. They're in trouble for what they have done, and we are in trouble because we have been unable to maintain our own integrity in the presence of pressure. So all the way along we take the physical things first. Now the physical things are laws, society. The physical things are marriage and home and family and parents and business. All these things have got to be redeemed. That is, they've got to be straightened out. It doesn't mean that we have to give up everything and become wanderers in the desert. It means that we have to try to use things and not abuse them, trying to find out how to be the greater good to all concerned by the growth and unfoldment of internal faculties. So this goes on until the person can really honestly say that he is no longer hating anything or anyone, that he is no longer out to cheat somebody, that he has no longer the determination to commit a crime against society because of his own personal dissatisfactions. If he gradually understands, then comes the point. To understand, he must begin to learn. He must begin to be aware that there are laws. He has to recognize that he is not making a reformation of himself simply because of something he doesn't understand. The physical solution to it is health. If it is bad for his health, then it's wrong. If it is bad for his associations, if it breaks up the normal experiences of living, if it puts penalties upon others that they do not need, then it is not good. But he has to find out for himself how to improve this situation. Now, as he gets a little further along, he comes again onto a new rung of the ladder. And this rung is supposedly governed by the god Mercury. And Mercury is communication. Mercury is also intelligence. Now, Mercury is not philosophy. Mercury is the kind of intelligence that we get in a public school system. Mercury is the training of the mind for the purpose of adjustment with circumstances and conditions. So we come now to the second rung of the ladder, and that is education. Education must become the source of certainties for us. Education must help us to have strength to make the changes that we need to make in order to accomplish the goals which we are presumed to accomplish. Therefore, education must lead us to idealism and not to materialism. Education must help us to understand the divine plan for things and not accept as inevitable human mistakes. We have to use education to find out what is worth knowing, how to find out what does the most to help us to be constructive, useful people. The mind gives us certain faculties upon which we can build and by which we can grow. But we have to in all ways find the inspiration, the integrities to make these adjustments useful and permanent in our lives. After we decide how to be educated, then we have to find out how to use education. An education that uses only our physical faculties for the maintenance of our physical securities is not adequate. Education must make us citizens of the whole great wheel of life. It must cause us to become potential citizens of a universal world, a world that extends beyond the stars. We should recognize ourselves as parts of a vast plan and not as poor, suffering individuals deserted by everything, including time. This is the second type of thought. Then we come to the rulership of the third rung of the ladder, which is Venus. Now, Venus is emotional maturity. It is the revelation of the emotional beauty factor. It governs affection, it governs beauty, it governs all of those impulses which arise from the sublimities of existence. It is also a sincere affair. The great keynote of Venus is sincerity, that all emotions must be true, must be real, must be right, that all emotions must lead the individual to a higher degree of insight and, if necessary or possible, impel others to self-improvement. In other words, the satisfaction of affections is the proper use of our feelings of unity, of responsibility, and of all those natural relationships which are part of our third step of initiation, so to say. In other words, we have to cleanse the inside of the emotional cup. We have to purify our lives. We do not become ascetics. We do not become monastics. We become kindly people, using the powers that we possess as they were intended. All misuse is tragedy. Things must be as they should be. And that takes the next rung of the ladder, and that next rung is the sun. Of course, the ancients considered the sun to be a planet. This was not true, but for their analogy of the purpose they were working with, it was suitable until other planets were discovered. The sun, is therefore, comes to be the life giver. The sun is the contribution of each individual to the eternal growth of things. It is the problem of bringing life and light to others. It is service. It is protection. It is the necessary sacrifice of self-interest for the good of all things. The Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten worshipped or venerated the divine power in the form of a sunball. Each of the rays of the sun ending in a human hand, these hands intended to lift up the holy, lift up the sad, lift up the imperfect, and to rescue all life from the restrictions of ambition and things of this nature. Therefore, it was the problem of the Son that the individual becomes a son on this level of integration, and therefore must give his light to the whole world, and must never in any way fail to share those good values which he has, as light of morality, light of integrity, light of comfort, consolation, and pity. All these things belong to the sharing of life one with another. After this has been more or less well accomplished, we pass to Mars, and this is one that most people will have a great trouble with. It is high on the level of initiation rites, because it would be impossible to accomplish it without considerable previous growth. But Mars is competition. Mars is mutual destruction for profit. Mars is the desperate effort to overwhelm, overcome, or dominate something. Now in nations this causes war after war, and is one of the most destructive factors there is in human life. But most always also it is a symbol of domination in little things. Domination in a home, domination in business, domination in the community, even domination in theology. All domination, all effort to bind by force others to slavery to us or our purposes, our ambitions, the sacrifice of the life of the child in order that the child may fulfill our ambitions. All of these things come under Mars. Mars is a more or less active, somewhat destructive force, but it is also the basis of courage. It is the basis of willingness to sacrifice self for the common good. It is sometimes the sign of the martyr, but it is always the sign constructively of the struggle for peace, the continuance of the determination to do what is right, even in the midst of great adversity. So Mars gives us the inspiration or the identity which makes it possible for us to fight the good fight, which is the fight against darkness, the fight against ignorance, the fight against death, but not the fight against man or the law. And the peace comes at the end of this kind of struggle, because understanding and insight become stronger than strife. And until our understanding is stronger than strife, there will be no peace in the world. That takes us to the next problem, and that is Jupiter. Now Jupiter, of course, was the father, or Zeus was the father of the gods. Zeus has come down to us in our thinking as the symbol of great intellectual maturity. Zeus is judgment. It is also the basis of all higher philosophical dedications. Zeus is the righteous ruler, but Zeus is also a symbol of that ruler which is the part of ourselves. Gradually we have gotten ourselves away from the domination of faculties, sensory perceptions, and the lower parts of consciousness. We come finally to Jupiter. Jupiter is the symbol of a strange kind of majority. Jupiter is the worldly wise. It knows all things that are necessary to know, except that it will never be able to solve the mystery of itself. Jupiter, therefore, is a wisdom in which worldly wisdom has been blended with divine wisdom. And if this blending is proper and complete, then Jupiter becomes the symbol of the philosophic elect. A philosophical person is not one who knows more than his neighbor, but one who lives better than his neighbor, and helps, if possible, to bring his neighbor into peace. Now Jupiter also points out that there will always be leadership of some kind in this world, that no matter what we do, no time will come when everyone is exactly the same. And in the interim by which we must climb this ladder, there will be many times in which leadership becomes important. And therefore the great problem arises in the name of the Jupiterian leadership. The Jupiterian leader, no matter how much power it has, will never abuse that power in any way. The Jupiterian leader will never fail to work first of all for the good of the led. for those he leads. The Jupiterian leader also has a deep religious insight. No good leader can be an atheist. He cannot hope to solve the people's problems unless in his own can be an atheist. He cannot hope to solve the people's problems unless in his own heart he has blended the intellect and the spiritual faculties of the human constitution. The leader must therefore be enlightened, and an enlightened leader is one above any action which is not honorable. The leader responsibility is heavy, and instead of using leadership as a symbol of opportunity to exploit, really leadership is the privilege of service. It is the privilege of doing things for other people to make life better for them and for the world in which they live. The unselfish leadership is the highest aspect, and therefore becomes the sixth level of the cycle. And then comes the last, Saturn. And Saturn was the ancient father who devoured all his own sons. It was a very interesting legendary behind Saturn. Saturn is a symbol of a very deep composure. Saturn is the final statement of a maturity blending inside spiritual enlightenment with material adjustments. Saturn is therefore the symbol of that balance which, when achieved, makes the individual almost indestructible. Saturn is that which has no longer any breakage with law. It has no longer any conflict with realities. Therefore, in the more common feelings of astrology, Saturn is the bestower of long life. This means simply that it has reached the point where it does not cause short life to itself. It has kept the rule. It has made the dedications. It has the profound attitudes and yet the simplicity and directness of revelation. So Saturn represents the truly wise person, the philosophic elect, the sage, the person who has lived the life and has now become the teacher of others. It is the religious symbol of leadership. It is the power to become the good shepherd and carry forward the labors of sharing wisdom. It is from the Saturn level that the great leaders of peoples should be chosen. Leaders who would be incapable of leading a people into war. A leader that would be incapable of permitting discord and dissension of an unreasonable nature from arising within his empire. So that the one who would be the greatest among us must be the servant of all, and that is the position of Saturn. All greatness is service. All elevation is for the service of those who must obey the laws of leadership. So there can be no mistake, no fallacies, no corruptions possible in this pattern of things. Now, if the individual has followed this line through, he then comes, as the Egyptian mystery shows, and the Eleusinian and the Bacchic and Osirian mysteries, he comes into the presence of the Great One. In this sense, in Egypt, we follow very closely the story in the Apocalypse of John. But we come to the great figure walking among the candlesticks, carrying the stars. This is a symbol of that which is above these limitations. This is a release in which the individual, having step by step overcome the impediments which he has placed upon himself or has permitted to society to place upon him through wrong education and wrong laws, that the individual comes into the presence of Osiris in Egypt and comes into the presence of the Lord with the stars and the candlesticks. And in every religion there is some, whether it is Shangti in China or whether it is Mahavarakana in Buddhist Japan, all of these symbols represent coming face to face with the truth, coming face to face with the thing that is as it is. I am that I am. And this tremendous experience was represented in the mysteries by the psychostatia, or the weighing of the soul. Here it was that, having passed all tests and obligations, having fulfilled the discipleships of the mystery rites, having learned all that was possible to be taught by illumined and initiated teachers, the individual comes straight into the presence of that which is his own destiny. Now, if this occurs and the individual reaches the highest degree of initiation physically, he becomes an arhat, or a lohan, or an adept in the terminology of different religions. He then becomes one who knows. Now, as one who knows, the very fact of knowledge brings with it the first great burden that knowledge must bear. But now that he knows, he must give and share knowledge. He must go forth in the name of knowledge and in the name of service to become a depending force in the development of other people. He must become a part of the hierarchy, or the order of leadership, which is behind the administration of universal law on the physical plane. Because the laws themselves are not physical, it is only an individual who has transcended the physical in his own life and has become the arhat, who is capable of interpreting something above the physical for the needs of those who are still bound by the physical. Again, it is a problem of proper instruction, and the adept, having received that instruction, is capable of sharing it. But the Buddha said on one occasion that the longest journey begins with a single step. And this is more or less the problem that we face. We are all of us on this journey, whether we know it or not. And we are going to be unhappy on the journey until we learn that it's the journey that can make us happy. But we have to make the first step. We have to make a dedication. We have to indicate bringing a burnt offering to the altar of the Lord, as described in the tabernacle rites. We must bring a gift to the altar as a proof of sincerity. And the only gift that anyone can really give is himself. We have to therefore sacrifice the self-rulership in order to come under the heading of divine rulership. Now, self-rulership for most people is rulership by the ego, by the personal self, by the individuality, by one of the lesser powers of life. But when we lift this rulership from the personal equation, when we no longer say, I want this and I will do that, and we gradually find out the truth of these things, we then realize that this leadership is always vested finally in the pious part of our own natures. Now, as the various elements of the pattern of the 7 steps have unfolded in ourselves, we finally shift the leadership of our lives from the mind, from the ego, to the divine principle abiding always within ourselves. For just as surely as a supreme power fashions all things, so the spark of that supreme power has fashioned us and is finally the ruler of our lives. Therefore, the initiate ascending always finds in the end communion with the innermost, communion with that which is the divine within himself or herself, the rulership of that which was the source and cause and the only answer to all the questions of life. There is only one reality in each of us, and that is the divine power. And each in his own way must pay homage to that power. And each out of his own struggles, his own labors, and his own works must build a temple which is to be the dwelling place of that one power. So each individual is building his own sanctuary through purification, through discipline, through service, and through all those things which make life real. So as we sit down trying to study this a little bit, why don't we just also look back a little? Read something that Paracelsus wrote. Read something of Neoplatonism or Gnosticism. Read something of Buddhism. H.G. Wells said that Buddhism was probably the most important moral doctrine the world ever had. And the Buddhist philosophy of life is very, very simple. Serve the good. Refrain from evil. Purify the mind. This was the basis of that entire religion which moved at one time across the face of Asia. We are all now looking to find out how to improve the present situation. And the first thing we have to do is to put together all the analogies, all of the overwhelming parallels that we can see in every level of life, and from these get a new vision of law and find out that we are in a universe of law and order, and that we are the ones that are out of order. And until we correct this condition, there will be no permanent improvement. That's it.